It's worth zooming in on some specific differences between indigenous people and Americans having to do with religious ideas or sort of spiritual ideas. So one central one was they had very different ways of thinking about the relationship between humans and animals and other parts of the natural world. The standard sort of Christian interpretation at this point really emphasized passages in the Bible that talk about God giving Adam, the original man in Christian teachings, dominion over animals, which really means like mastery, right? Almost like animals are meant to be the servants of man, as and in general that the natural world is there to serve human beings and to be taken, which you can sort of see how that jibes with a project of colonizing and taking land to improve your economy. And while there were very different specifics across indigenous societies, there was a general idea that the natural world was holy and divine, that the gods or spirits or whatever sort of greater power various tribes believed in, like actually lived in the forms of animals and plants and even things like mountains and rivers. So you've got these very conflicting ideas about that. Another place where there's pretty broad differences is in sort of the view of what is evil and wrong and and bad and which forms of death and violence are okay and sanctioned by God. So, for instance, from the perspective of a lot of Native Americans, Christianity's willingness to torture people to death who didn't believe this in the same God through things like the Spanish Inquisition, or even the idea that was common in Catholicism of eating your own God when you take communion. There's a kind of symbolic eating and drinking of the blood of Jesus Christ. That stuff seemed crazy to a lot of Native peoples, where from the European perspectives, they were really freaked out and interpreted the use of skulls or human sacrifice, or sometimes the drinking of blood or eating of body parts of enemies that was practiced by some, although certainly not all indigenous societies, as being evidence of evil and satanic associated practices. So that was a major difference. And related to that, ideas about the afterlife, right? Where for Christian Europeans, it was this idea that there was a heaven that you were going to get rewarded and saved after your death for following certain rules of how to be a good person. Whereas for the vast majority of indigenous societies, afterlife was sort of rooted in the idea of the spirits of ancestors and maintaining connections to those who had come before, who are still sort of present in the rituals. So again, very different ideas about like why and how to be a good person and what happens after death. And it's worth just noting that one way that they were similar is that they each, neither Europeans nor most Native American societies had anything in their kind of religious teachings or creation myths that kind of like explained where the other one came from, right? There weren't, they weren't aware of each other for the most part, and so they each had to sort of interpret like, who are these people? How do they like, who are they in the stories that we've been telling ourselves for hundreds of years? And as we'll see later, Europeans, found some stuff in the Bible to explain the existence of non-white people and to justify their treatment, whereas indigenous people sometimes saw them as gods, as famously the Mexica or Aztec, initially believed that the arrival of Spanish conquerors was an arrival of a god. In other places, they were interpreted as evil,